We're going to go now into the third of the main Ashigarami systems that we work with. We've seen this idea that we have a straight Ashigarami with my training partner's leg goes straight across my hip and never passes my center line. We've seen the idea of a cross Ashigarami where my leg definitely does go across my center line, his right leg over my right hip. Now we're going to look at the idea of a reverse Ashigarami. Unlike the other two, we won't be facing into our opponent. Rather, we'll be facing away from them. It can be done in many different scenarios, but the main scenario we'll look at is a seated scenario where we're perched on top of our training partner. It's very important that we learn to sit over our training partner's hip rather than down on the floor. When my buttocks are on the floor, there's no weight over my opponent, there's very little control, and my opponent can easily start heisting out and turning to face. Okay? So it's very important we initially learn to control our training partner with body weight, like so. Whenever we work in this position, it's important to understand that one of the beauties of the reverse Ashigarami is its versatility and its ability to allow us to transition into other forms of Ashigarami. With just a few simple movements, it becomes very possible for me to go into other forms of Ashigarami facing my opponent, other forms of Ashigarami facing into my opponent, etc., etc. It's an incredibly valuable position. It enables us not only to transition into other forms of Ashigarami very, very readily, but also into other submission holds. Almost all of the submission holds we've looked at so far were either inside or outside heel hooks. And in truth, these two moves constitute around 90% of our leg lock finishes. However, once we start to become adept at the reverse Ashigarami, two other highly effective leg locking techniques, the figure four toe hold and the knee bar, become very, very important. We'll be looking at these in some detail in the next few series. We've been looking at this idea that for every given scenario in the sport of Jiu-Jitsu, there's usually at least one central problem that guides the overall action between the two athletes. In the case of the reverse Ashi position, at least the version we're looking at now, there are actually two central problems running right next door to each other, and we have to be able to overcome both more or less at the same time. Let's have a look at what these problems are. If I have an opponent and I'm on top, perched in this position, the first problem we have here is the stability problem. I'm in an inherently unstable position. If my opponent were to suddenly shift his body weight underneath me, there's a chance I could be dislodged. And now, there's still good things I can do from here, but it's not the optimal situation where I'm controlling my opponent's hips with body weight. Okay? It's an inherently unstable position. Moreover, if I tried hard to widen my base in this situation to gain stability, I now have less control of the leg. Now my opponent can start pommeling a foot underneath my thigh and can start causing problems for me and you. Okay? If I respond by tightening my Ashigarami, now I'm less stable because my base of support is narrowed. So when he shifts his weight, I feel it even more than before. So there definitely is a stability problem in this position, at least this particular version of it. There's another problem that runs right alongside that. You can clearly see that there's a primary leg, the one which is inside my Ashigarami, and a secondary leg, the one which is outside. There's no control of this leg. There's no reason why my opponent can't use his secondary leg to cross or even triangle his legs, so that the leg which is held inside my Ashigarami is now protected by the other leg. When I went for, say, example, a heel hook, and he's got a tight triangle here, I can't access my opponent's foot, at least the one which is inside my Ashigarami. If I went for a knee bar, for example, one leg is protecting the other. Nothing's going to happen until I learn to untangle these tangled legs. So we've got two problems running at the same time. I have to be able to untangle these legs while at the same time maintaining my stability. And that can be a problem. As I go to untangle legs, he's moving underneath me, you're losing stability in these situations. Okay? As these two problems run concurrently, we need effective solutions that solve those two problems at the same time. We'll be looking at those very shortly. we're looking at the reverse Ashigarami position. We're looking at the idea that there are two central problems running right alongside each other. Let's look at solving one problem at a time. Ultimately, when it's time to go live, you'll have to solve the two problems together. But learning wise, let's do one problem at a time. Let's look first at the problem of untying legs. As my opponent locks a solid triangle here, I need to be able to get in and untie my training partner's legs. Now, ironically, the first thing we want to do here is actually tighten his legs, to tighten the knot. Why? Because my knee line here plays a very important role. I want his legs, and especially the knee, inside the knee line. If my opponent's triangle starts to slip down my legs, I start to lose control of both legs simultaneously. Okay? So ironically, when it's time to undo my opponent's legs, your first motion is actually to tie them up tighter. That also helps get us around the first problem of stability. Okay? So I'm going to put my two hands, one here on the foot, one here at the knee, and I'm going to bring everything up to the hip. Okay? If my opponent's legs start coming down my body, it's even easier for him now to destabilize me by shifting his weight. Okay, and bringing my hips down to the floor. So our first thing is to bring the legs up and tighten things. Now, I'm going to make a recommendation for you. When it comes to keeping stability, most people work with a wide base. That's simple physics. But I'm going to recommend that when you work from this position, we focus more on wedging. You're going to have to sacrifice some of your stability to do this. But don't worry, I'll come back to this problem in the next section. So I'm going to recommend we put a wedge in on our training partner and our two knees point in the same direction. If my knees point outwards away from each other, the grip on the leg tends to be rather superficial, and it's only your hands holding his legs in place. Okay, and quick explosive people here on bottom can definitely cause problems for you. So I like to use my legs to form a wedge around our training partner's legs, so it's mostly my legs holding him in place. Yes, I've sacrificed a little stability to do this, but I do have a much better control of my training partner's legs. Okay, now we need to untie the legs. The way we're going to do this is we're going to come down and we're going to get the end of the lever. I'm going to put the middle of my hand right on the first knuckle of my training partner's smallest toe and capture it here. Don't grab down, this is completely worthless. Okay, we come here to the end of the lever. The directionality of force is very, very important. I want to pull his foot towards his own knee. Don't try to do this. Lift up, make a strong triangle. Never try to lift up against the triangle. You're not going to win that battle. Take your opponent in the direction where the leg is weak. Take the foot to his own knee. As I do this, I take my other hand underneath and I seize the other end of the lever at the heel. So I have crossed arms over his crossed legs. I pull at the same time. One foot goes towards his own knee, and as I untie the knot, I make sure that I separate my training partner's legs. Because I'm utilizing the end of the lever, it's relatively easy for me now to straighten out my training partner's legs. Because I had my two legs functioning as wedges around my opponent's legs, rather than here, where my opponent could simply invert his knee down towards the floor, and I lose everything. I keep good control as a result. My left leg functioning as a wedge holds him in place. Now when he goes to kick his legs free, it's very, very difficult because you're controlling the ends of the levers. Okay, and we're in a good position now to start going on the attack. So once again, starting off in this position, we'll start with a loosely applied grip on our training partner. The first thing is rather ironic. We have to tighten the knot first before we can untie it. Okay, so we're going to seize knee and ankle. We're going to draw our training partner's legs up onto the hip. We're going to wedge with our legs around our training partner so our two knees point in the same direction. We're going to get our hands set. One goes over and one goes under. I pull one foot towards the knee, and as I untie the knot, I straighten the second leg out so he can't retie the legs. If he goes to retie in this position, it's very, very difficult. You keep the 2 feet separate. Notice how my elbow goes inside his shin, dominating the inside position. Don't have your elbow over. He can kick free and he's gone. It's very, very important the elbow stays in the inside. Now from here, when he tries to retie his legs, my elbow prevents him from getting the legs together. You're not as stable as you want to be in this position, but your wedges are in place, and don't worry, we'll take care of the stability problem next. The main thing is that from this initial position like so, we first tie the knot tighter than it was before, we lock up, elbow in the center, untie, and we've got 2 untied legs, and we're ready to play. We're looking at the reverse Ashigurami system. In particular, we're looking at 2 primary problems that we face, the 2 central problems that we face in this situation. The first one we've seen is our opponent tying up his legs defensively. Okay, we have a primary and a secondary leg. The primary leg, of course, is the one inside my Ashigurami. That's the one ultimately we want to attack. But the secondary leg in this particular position can strongly defend the primary leg. We saw a very useful method of untying the legs so we could get on the attack. But there's a second problem going on alongside this problem. This is the stability problem. We've seen that as we step into this position, our opponent ties up his legs defensively. We've got a good way now of untying the legs, very high percentage. We've seen we've got a good way of wedging the legs, but there's a problem now of stability. From my opponent's perspective, it's in his interest to shift his hips out in this direction and tilt me down here. Okay. Now, when we work in this position, things can come unstuck very quickly. If he reties his legs in this position, this is not. There's still things I can do. Don't get me wrong, but it's not the optimal situation here. Okay. So we can see we've got to take care of this stability problem. It's one thing to untie the legs, but we need some kind of way of getting around this potential problem. My favorite way of doing this is a double leg roll. You guys all know that I'm a huge proponent of what we call the principle of double trouble, that most of the resistance to any given leg lock will always come from the secondary leg. You can see that obviously in this case. Here's the primary leg between my legs, and the secondary leg is the one causing all of the problems here. Okay. When I go to separate my training partner's legs in this situation, and I get the separation I'm looking for, there's a danger now that as I get dislodged, my opponent can get his secondary leg back into a strong defensive position. So what we're going to do is take care of this with a roll that deliberately puts us down to the floor in an extremely stable position. You have to manage the roll carefully. Sometimes I'll teach this move and people just roll from wherever they are. Okay, that's not the idea. I want a stable, controlled roll that puts me into an even more stable position. There's a simple way of doing this. Start with your knee. I take my right knee, the one that's between my training partner's legs, and I put my knee down to the floor so that I'm already much closer to the mat than I was previously. Now, in one motion, I bring my head outside his foot. That's very important. I'll explain why in a minute. And then I take my hand off the foot and I catch it and hug it to my chest. Why did I have to move my head? If I just release the foot here, my opponent has good reactions and he just rapidly extends his leg, I miss the roll and everything's lost and now your back is exposed. Okay, remember your back is partially exposed in this position, so let's not take any crazy risks here. Okay, so I put my head in position first, so I'm going to win the race for the foot. If my head is out of position, it's a race to get, just hold your leg in place, it's a race for me to get my arm around his foot. If my head starts a long way away, I've got to cover a lot of distance. As he rapidly extends his leg, I can lose that race. But if I artificially put my head in a position where I'm almost guaranteed to win the race when he goes to extend now, there's just not time for him to extend away from me. Now I lock a sankaku, a triangle, around my training partner's legs. I am now in an extremely stable position. I can't roll any further than this. And we're working in accordance with the principle of double trouble because both of my training partner's legs are controlled. When he tries to pull his legs away from me, they're both locked in. One is locked down even more securely by my body weight, and the other is being held at the end of the lever. As a result, you have tremendous stability, both legs are separated, and you solve both problems simultaneously. Let's have a look at that whole sequence again. We're seeing there's 2 problems going on here. The first problem is the tied up legs problem. My opponent has tied his leg successfully, and as a result, I can't attack the primary leg. I can't isolate it. The other problem is the stability problem, that I'm in an inherently unstable position here. Okay? We've seen this idea that if we form effective wedges on our training partner, like so, and use a particular method of untying the legs based on directionality of force. I pull the foot in the one direction that the leg is weak, foot to knee, and separate our training partner's legs. Now from here, stability is the issue. So I put a knee on the floor as a first step to get stable to some degree, and at the same time set up a roll across my training partner's legs. I get head position, hug, and then I just go down to his shoulder and lock a Senkaku. When my opponent goes to pull his legs free, it's shockingly difficult. When he goes to roll around from here, it doesn't matter where we roll, you've still got the extended leg and you're ready to attack. We've looked at the double leg roll as a means of gaining stability and separating our training partner's legs, thus overcoming the two central problems that we face in the reverse Ashigarami position. Let's look now at finishing off this double leg roll. In order to do this, we're going to start bringing in some new elements that we haven't seen before. Let's bring in a knee bar, a variation of the knee bar, which is highly effective out of this position, and a valuable addition to your leg lock arsenal. We've seen that when someone locks up defensively in this position, our first action typically is to tighten things up. Then from here we go in and secure our training partner at the heel and come all the way up to the toe line, lock it in place, elbow in the middle, untie the legs, and from here put a knee on the floor, then catch our training partner's heel and come down to the mat with a Senkaku locked. In this position, I'm going to take my hand without releasing the secondary leg. My elbow still controls the secondary leg, and we're going to block just like so. I'm going to take my other hand and we're going to go around and inside, and as a result I can reach back and get a hold of either my own thigh or his calf muscle. They're both good options. Now when I go to finish in this position, I typically lock a semi-Senkaku, a half triangle, rather than a full triangle. I go at the calf muscle. Watch my right knee. My right knee pressures forward. As my head comes off the mat, I bring my elbow back in towards myself. That's very, very important. The further forward my elbow is, the more my opponent can rotate inside my knee bar. I don't want that. So I make sure the elbow is pointing back as though we're trying to touch my elbow on my own back. Then from here, I arch forward and we get very strong braking pressure. It's important that the knee be locked out in such a way as the elbow retracts, the knee goes forward, the pelvis goes in, and we get very strong knee bar pressure as a result. Once again, from a situation where we start off on top of our training partner, first we go in and tie up the legs, pass and lock up the heel. Then we go over the top, secure our training partner at the toe line, and untie our training partner's legs. Now we place our knee on the floor and we go into the double leg roll. I get head position, catch and control, and pitch over to the side. I lock the figure of 4 around my training partner's leg. From here, the hand goes in and blocks, the second arm goes around. The elbow goes all the way behind me, and then I drive forward with the pelvis. Everything starts with the knee. As the knee extends, the pelvis goes forward, and we get very strong braking pressure. If for whatever reason you feel it's going to be risky to pass the arm all the way around and go into the so-called lat knee bar, where my opponent's leg is controlled over the lat muscle, the second option here is to take my training partner's shoelaces and put them here on my shoulder and double up with my hands. From this position, I drive forward and we get a very strong finish. Remember, it all starts with, in this case, my right knee. We lock in, the knee points towards my training partner's tailbone. Then from here, the pelvis goes forward and we get a strong braking position. One of the most important of the general principles of the leg lock system, and also just my approach to jiu-jitsu in general, is the principle of dilemma. Most people, when they go to into fight with their opponents, tend to create problems for their opponents. Now, problems almost always have solutions. Dilemmas, on the other hand, don't have solutions. They just have two bad outcomes that my opponent has to choose between. Whenever possible, always try to create dilemmas for your opponent rather than problems. An interesting reflection here is that when we work from the reverse ashi position, it's extremely easy to create dilemmas. One of the most well-known was used by Gary Tonin in a spectacular fashion in one of his leg lock victories. When we work in this position, we've seen that the problems we face here are first a stability problem and then untying my opponent's defensive legs. Whenever we work here, we've seen that a good first action is to tighten up the lock, just like so, and from here start to create wedges around my opponent. This time, instead of turning across my opponent and forming the wedges, we're going to sit in a deliberately unstable position with our two legs facing out in this direction, rather than as we did for the double trouble roll, where we turned our legs across our training partner's center line with knees close together. Why? Because in truth, we're going to go down to a shoulder very soon and we'll be stable. So we're not going to focus too much on stability in this particular operation. So our first thing, as our opponent locks a triangle here, is to take our opponent's legs and hike them up close to us. Now, as I hold onto one foot, I'm going to reach across and grab the other. I'm going to draw his foot over and inside my knee. That's very important. I don't want an unsupported foot. I want his foot wedged and supported by my right knee. Now I'm in a position where I can take my second arm and go over and form another wedge over both of my training partner's legs. Now I'm going to go down to a knee first. We've seen already we don't want to fall a long distance to the floor. That tends to create impact which can loosen the arrangement that I've made. So I put a hand down and the knee follows. As soon as we're stable on our knee, I take a hold of my training partner's foot and I lock into this position. Because I'm on my side, I'm completely stable now. The idea of stability is no longer an issue. If my opponent just maintains his current foot position and doesn't react to what I've done, I've locked up a figure 4 toe hold on my training partner. I can attack right here by pointing his toes in towards his tailbone, just like so. And then I take my right elbow and I pull, so that we do the same thing in the toe hold that we were learning with the heel hooks. We want to begin with a push on the toes and terminate with a pull on the heel. Only now it's going to be the elbow pulling out. So we push in, taking all the slack out of our training partner's joint. And from here, I pull with the elbow. The only way my opponent can react to this is to use his other foot to separate my hands from his. And as he pushes, my figure 4 toe hold gets compromised, and no problem, we grab the heel of the primary leg. Now we're in a position where we can control that leg, pass our arm through and around, and put a hand on our training partner's calf muscle. My elbow retracts behind me. I have both legs controlled, the principle of double trouble in operation again. My knee points towards my training partner's tailbone, and as a result the whole body arches and we get an extremely strong attack on our training partner's knee. Let's have a look at that whole sequence again. Starting off in the reverse Ashigarami position. First, let's tie that knot tighter. We bring everything in and hike up. Now, I reach and get a hold of my training partner's foot. Where I grip is extremely important. Don't just grab anywhere on the foot. I want to be able to go immediately into a breaking grip. That means my first knuckle of the middle finger will cover the first knuckle of the smallest toe, so that when I make the grip, you immediately dominate the end of the lever. Now, I draw the foot over my knee and wedge it on my knee. So there's a wedge underneath my opponent's leg. Now the best examples of wedging always wedge both sides of the limb you're trying to control. Here the wedge is underneath, now I need a wedge on top. Now that's going to be my right arm. The right arm goes over the top, and now his leg is wedged from underneath by my knee and from on top by my armpit and tricep. I'm in the perfect position now to take one foot around the corner as my hand extends. That puts my knee on the floor. As a result, I can go down to the floor in a controlled fashion that gives me the perfect breaking position. If my opponent doesn't react to the first horn of the dilemma, you'll win right here. He has to react, and that creates the second horn of the dilemma. As I lose the figure 4 toe hold, I catch and lock. I transfer, arm goes around, and we make a switch into one of the strongest of the knee bar variations, the lat knee bar. We hold either calf or thigh. The most important thing is my elbow retracts behind me. That takes the slack out of the knee. If I don't take the slack out of the knee, I can move a long way forward without result, and worse still, my opponent can turn his knee inside my ashigarami. So it's very important the elbow come back. Now when he tries to turn the knee inside the ashi, it's very, very difficult. Notice that my legs back heel and my knee critically points forward. Now when he goes to turn the knee, it's just not happening. Both legs are controlled. The principle of double trouble in effect. Now we drive forward and we get fantastic braking pressure on the leg. One more time. Starting off on top of our training partner. We tie everything up, catch, wedge 1, wedge 2. Down to the floor in a controlled fashion, knee to the mat. Lift, tuck, and roll. First horn of the dilemma, figure 4 toe hold. He goes to kick out and reacts. Second horn of the dilemma, knee bar. Elbow back, knee forward, back heel with the triangle. When he goes to turn inside my ashigarami, it's impossible. Now from here, pressure for the finish. We're looking at the reverse ashigarami system. We've seen that once we introduce reverse ashigarami system, we start bringing in some new characters in the submissions, in particular the knee bar and the figure 4 toe hold. Let's look now in some detail at the figure 4 toe hold, starting in a reverse ashi position, transitioning to another form of ashigarami, and going through the mechanics of a properly applied figure 4 toe hold. Previously, we looked at the idea of applying a figure 4 toe hold to the secondary leg, the leg that is not inside my ashigarami. But in all honesty, we were using that more or less as a setup to a more concerted attack with a knee bar on the primary leg. It was really just a dilemma pairing. What about if we start to go into a serious attack on the primary leg with the figure 4 toe hold? Is that possible? Does it work? Absolutely. It's a fantastic way of attacking. In fact, it's arguably as powerful as any heel hook. The primary stress, however, will be distributed on your opponent's ankle rather than the knee. Working in more or less the same fashion that we've been looking at so far, we're going to start by tightening up the knot that we work with. Then from here, we're going to go through and untie our training partner's legs. Once we get the legs untied in this situation, we can go into a direct attack with a figure 4 toe hold on my training partner's leg. I'm going to demonstrate this from a variety of angles. The first one, I'll be facing away from the camera, but don't worry, we'll come back very, very soon. When we first go into attack here, what I like to do is gain stability. So with both my training partner's legs controlled, I put my knee down to the floor, just like so. So I'm more or less stable. Now, as I release the secondary leg, my hand goes through and catches my training partner, so that the middle knuckle, the first middle knuckle of my fingers, goes directly to the first knuckle of his smallest toe. Essentially, I want to cover the knuckle line of my training partner's foot with my hand. I don't want to grab the toes themselves, nor do I want to grab the shoelaces of the foot. I want the middle ground where we have the line of knuckles and I go through and catch. It's important that my middle knuckle cover my training partner's smallest toe. Now from here, I bring my head towards his foot. Never have the foot a long way from your head, so that when you reach through, your hands can't reach properly. The first thing we do is we bring everything in, so that my hands effortlessly go through and connect. I don't want situations where I'm reaching like so and unable to connect my hands. Okay, so our first thing is to bring the head in close to the foot, and then when we lock, I focus on keeping my elbow all the way down by the heel and ankle. Now, as I lock, I go down to the floor and walk up just like so, and my ankles cross on the far side. I bring my head down to my training partner's toes, and I sweep my elbow out towards his heel. And as a result, we can apply tremendous pressure on his sharply bent leg. Let's show that same move from another angle so you can more clearly see my hand configuration and the directionality of force being applied. As we start off like so, we've seen our first action here is to bring everything in tight. Now from here we want to untie our training partner's legs. I go in and I catch the heel. I untie my training partner's legs in the same manner that we've been looking at earlier in the day. I bring my knee down just like so. My second leg sweeps back. As I release the secondary leg, I aim with precision right there with the first knuckle of my middle finger so that the knuckle line of the toes is completely covered. Once I make that initial contact on my training partner, my head goes forward and as a result my hands lock effortlessly. I put his foot down and I sit through and my ankles lock. I sweep my elbow down to his heel. That's very important. The further my elbow is up towards the knee, the less successful I'm going to be. I want to dominate the end of the lever. So I come down with the elbow to the end of the lever, like so. As I lock up, you'll see there's no daylight between his shoelaces and my wrist. The more daylight you can see between my wrist and his shoelaces, the less successful I'm going to be. I want everything in, covering my own hand, maximizing the use of the lever. Now, notice how his leg is sharply bent. I'm going to place his toes in towards my hips and bring my head in front of the toes. The more extended the leg is in this position, the more work I have to do to get a clean break. So I want everything in compact. Essentially what I'm going to do here is a heel hook with my hands. That's really what a figure four toe hold is. So I lock everything in, my elbow comes down, and we hit that exact same motion that we saw with the heel hook from outside Ashigarami earlier in the series. My knee pressures down, and from here I pull with my elbow. Do you remember the concept of follow through when we looked at braking mechanics? Well, here is the breaking point, but you can clearly see the follow through potential here is tremendous. This is a very, very strong braking position. The brake tends to center directly on the ankle, much more than the knee in the case of a figure four toe hold, particularly when we have a sharp bend in the leg, as we do now. Once we come in here, look on my elbow, sweeps down to the ankle. I keep his toes right in the pocket of my hip. The more my opponent's toes come into my hip, the more successful the break. The more his toes come up to my armpit, the more inclined I'm going to be to switch to a heel hook as the more efficient option. So my general rule of thumb is, the more sharply bent the foot towards the hip, the more I'm going to play figure four toe hold. The more the shoelaces drift north up towards my armpit, the more I'm going to play heel hook. And I use this as a simple dilemma pairing when I go to attack my opponent. If the foot is in the middle ground, I can go either way. But if I'm going to go toe hold, I put it in my hip and I get my body in front of the shoelaces. The further my torso is from the shoelaces, the less successful I become, the more it becomes just my hands breaking the foot rather than my body. When I get my body in position, now the braking pressure we can achieve is just tremendous, just as bad as any heel hook. And from here you can see the follow through is enormous. Let's have a look at this one more time. We'll start off in this reverse Ashigarami position. We tighten things up. From here, my hand goes through underneath, secures the heel, and we use our standard method of untying the legs. As we untie the legs, we put a knee down for stability, foot retracts, and from here, I catch my training partner right there at the toes. I go down, elbow deep around my training partner. My head is forward so that my hands connect easily. The further my head is away, the more difficult it is for me to connect hands. Now, when we lock up, you'll notice there's no daylight between his shoelaces and my wrist. As a result, we're in the perfect position to move our body all the way around and put his toes on our hip. Because the toes are on the hip, we get tremendous braking pressure. The further the toes get away from the hip, the more work my hands have to do. So a lot of this here is positioning. I want to take his foot before I begin any kind of braking motion, and if I can, I'll compress the foot to the hip. If I can't move the foot to the hip, I will often move my hip to the foot. And as a result, when we come down to the heel and start that braking action, it's an intimidating lock. We're looking at the reverse Ashigarami system. In particular, we're paying attention to the figure 4 toe hold, one of the interesting submission holds that comes into play once we start playing the reverse Ashigarami situation. We just looked at a reverse figure 4 toe hold which was performed under optimal conditions, where we took our opponent's foot, got it very, very close to our torso, in particular down by the hip, and as a result we were able to put tremendous braking pressure on the ankle. Let's look now at a situation where you don't have optimal conditions. Let's be honest, in jiu-jitsu it's a combative sport, the other guy's fighting back hard. In the majority of cases you're going to have to work out of non-optimal situations to get the break. So let's look at some ideas in these situations. Let's turn the other way. We saw that working from this position, the reverse Ashigarami, our first thing is always to untie our training partner's legs. So we start with a pull, we feed our hand through underneath, and as a result we can untie the knot of our training partner's legs. Now we need stability, we come down to a knee and we start the action of controlling the end of the lever, locking on like so. In the previous move we were able to get a hold of our training partner's foot and keep it into the optimal position down here by the hip. And as a result we were able to use our arms in unison. Okay, let's be clear here. I have a pushing hand on the toes and a pulling arm at the heel. Okay, so the braking pressure, should always be the case with any kind of joint break, goes in two opposing directions. The right hand pushes in towards the tailbone. The left elbow pulls against that. We start with a push and we finish with a pull, just like heel hooking. Okay, this is the optimal situation where the leg is sharply bent and the foot itself is kept close to my center of mass down by the hips. Okay, what about situations where the leg starts to extend? Now the use of push and pull is much more convoluted, much more difficult. It tends to be the hand pushing and the elbow pulling, but without the body being involved. When I can wrap my body around the figure 4 toe hold, watch how my head moves, and that's where the power of the break comes from. As the head moves out, we get full extension and a very strong break. The moment the leg starts to extend, now it's just the hands that pulling and pushing, and it's much, much harder now for me to get into breaking positions. Okay, but still we can do good work. Okay, whenever I see my opponent's leg is starting to extend, my head becomes much more important. I'm going to focus on getting my head right in front of the toes, just like so. And as a result, I can sweep my elbow down and start to apply braking force successfully again. If I work with an extended leg, okay, optimally I should be working with a contracted leg, but if I work with an extended leg, the big problem here is if I push the foot away from my head, you sharply drop down in power levels. Okay, so what we want to do in these situations is bring our head to the foot. Then I can adjust my elbows around that body movement, and now I can bring my pulling elbow back into play. As Placido tries to defend himself and make his legs strong and resistant, all I focus on now is the pull of the elbow. Remember, good figure 4 toe holds always start with a push on the toe line and a pull on the heel line. But most of the power comes from the secondary pull rather than the primary push. Okay, so let's have a look at the problem. The problem is there's an optimal braking position close to our hips. From here the brakes come pretty easy. Unfortunately, your opponents know that, and so most of the time they're looking to extend legs. Okay, once we get an extended leg, the further the foot is away from my head, the less successful I'm going to be here. Now it's just my hands enacting the block. It would take tremendous physical strength on my part to get a successful break now. So what I recommend is stop what you're doing, get up and move your head towards the foot so you can adjust the elbow and bring the pulling elbow back in rather than just pushing hands. Now, even as Placido extends his leg fully, and we're working with a completely extended leg, I can still put that heavy pull which gets the braking pressure we need, because my head is right in front of the shoelaces. The further my head from the shoelaces, the more chances he has to turn inside my ashigarami and cause problems, etc., etc. Some people who will simply extend their legs and you've lost everything. Okay, so what we do in these situations is I keep my chest inside his knee here. If his knee turns inside my chest, now you get very, very poor figure four toe holds. So I want to keep the chest inside. I bring my head all the way up so that the head physically blocks my training partner's foot. Now, even though Placido's leg is almost completely extended, it's not a problem for me to lock up the ankles and from here lift with the elbow and get a pulling finish rather than a weak pushing finish. Now, having said that, let's also understand that there's going to be times the leg is so fully extended and so far away from you, the foot so far away from you, just feel the figure four toe hold has been lost. The opportunity came, went, and is now gone. Okay, in these situations, make a transition to something else. There's good transitions you can make here. If I feel my toe hold is just completely gone at this point, I will go back and physically hold my training partner's heel with one hand. The one-handed grip is fine because I'm propped up on my elbow. Even if my opponent went to take my back now, I'm safe because I can physically lift the heel off the floor and protect my back. Only if my opponent's leg curls inwards is my back seriously compromised. Okay, so what I want in these situations is to lift the heel. Okay, I can do that because I'm propped up successfully here on my elbow. Now I'm in a position where I can put my head inside my training partner's leg, switch my position, and go back into a heel hook attack. Now, as my opponent tries to come in behind me, take my back, etc., etc., you've got that same pulling power that we saw earlier in the heel hook series. So, from a situation where the leg is extended and I'm in a completely non-optimal breaking situation now, I will release the leg and catch the heel. I'll prop myself up as Placido comes for my back. I focus on keeping an elevated foot. It's hard for him now to take my back. Okay, now from this position, I tuck, put the shoelaces underneath my armpit, and we lock up the figure of four. We know our first motion here is always my elbow coming back, and as a result, we can quickly lock up very strong breaking grips. As he goes to move around me from here, we get something even stronger than the figure four toe hold, a strong heel hook finish. And we play between the heel hook and the figure four toe hold, depending upon how extended and how distant our opponent's leg is from our body. We're looking at the reverse ashigarami position and the system built around that. One of the great virtues of the reverse ashigarami position is that it greatly facilitates transitions into other forms of ashigarami. It's extremely easy because it functions as an intermediary between cross and outside ashigarami. It just happens to be facing in the opposite direction. So if I sit and fall and face my opponent in either direction, I'm going to end up in either a cross ashigarami or a straight ashigarami. Let's have a look at this and see how we can tie it back into one of our favorite submissions, the outside heel hook. From a situation where I'm in reverse ashigarami, we know our first thing here is to untie our training partner's legs. We've got some very good means of doing so. They almost always involve an initial tightening, so I can access my training partner's heel, then the end of the lever at the foot, elbow inside the shin, and as a result we can quickly and easily untie the legs. Now, it's an easy thing for me to transition to an outside ashigarami and to a heel hook. I've got some good news for you. Whenever we started heel hooks and all the other positions, a big part of what we faced in terms of problems was exposing our training partner's heel. We saw that if our opponent could put his heel on the mat, we had to work to expose the heel. We had to have techniques to do it. In the case of reverse ashigarami, there's no work to be done. Your opponent's heel is far from the floor. Heel exposure here is not going to be an issue. It's very, very easy from this position to expose the heel. It's pretty much there for the taking. In fact, you're actually physically holding it. So from here, I'm going to take my knee for the sake of stability and put it on the mat. Now, my opponent's heel is there for the taking. It's a long distance from the floor. All I do is put my bicep around the corner and go thumb down, gripping like so. Make sure you don't go thumb up with the brachialis muscle touching the toes. I want to go thumb down with the bicep touching. so that I make a complete wrap that completely turns my training partner's heel. Placido will tell you, in this position, there's already tension. As my elbow comes back to my own body, from here, I start an action where I can either lock my hands immediately, or if you want to be a little safer on your training partner, I post my hand on the floor. I go down to a controlled position on the mat by going down to an elbow. Make sure you go down to an elbow, not your shoulder. From here, it's a simple thing for us to lock up. I can go figure four, palm to palm, wrist to wrist, that's completely up to you. Now from here, as always, our head goes into a straight line and we get the braking pressure we're looking for. You're going to notice something interesting about this transition. The second you make contact with your opponent, there is tension in the leg. It's an unusually effective way of taking the slack out of the joint right from the start of the application. It's one of the most effective transitions in the leg lock system overall. Let's have a look at it again. Starting off in a reverse ashigarami. We tighten everything up, we go through and we secure the heel that ultimately we'll be going after. We untie our training partner's legs in the usual fashion. From here, we get stability through the use of the knee. Now, it's very important how we do this. I go inside the shoelaces, thumb down, so that when I come around the corner, there's already tremendous tension in the foot. All the slack has been removed before I even begin the heel hook. Placido will tell you it feels like your ankle could pop even in this position. When you're training with your training partners, you must respect that. You can hurt someone if you fall clumsily to the mat now. So we control the transition to the floor, and then we turn and face our training partner. So we've made a transition from a reverse ashigarami to a variation of a straight ashigarami. In this case, it's the outside ashigarami. Now, our hands lock in any way you favor. I bring my head over the foot. When I lift the heel now, we get that tremendous braking pressure that we're looking for. It started tight and just keeps getting tighter. One more time. Starting off like so. We catch, secure the heel, untie the legs, gain stability. Reach all the way through and lock up the foot. A controlled descent to the mat, lock up, head goes over the foot, and finishing. Let's look at one common error that often plagues people when they first start working this position. By now, I'm sure you're doing a good job of securing your opponent's foot. By now, I'm sure you're doing a good job of exposing the heel and getting into play. What many people do is they fall across the body. When they lock, they fall across their opponent's body, and now we can get up into a non-optimal braking position for me. I can still break from here, but it's definitely harder work, and my opponent can start standing over me, pushing my legs down towards the floor and breaking the structure of the ashigarami. So let's make sure we fall on the same side of the leg we're attacking rather than across the body to the opposite side. We're looking at the reverse ashigarami system. We've seen one of the great virtues of reverse ashigarami is that we can easily and rapidly transfer to other forms of ashigarami. It's, as it were, an intermediary position between the cross and straight ashigarami. It just happens to be facing the opposite direction. So if I fall and turn and face my opponent, I'm going to fall into either a cross ashigarami or a straight ashigarami variation. That's an extremely interesting thing because it means we can greatly broaden the number and type of submission holds we employ. We can use inside heel hooks, outside heel hooks, figure four toe holds, and knee bars, and use them in combination and in dilemma pairings that make it very difficult for your opponent to defend. Let's look now at the idea of going from a reverse ashigarami and literally sitting off our opponent into a cross ashigarami, one of our favorite techniques, the inside heel hook. From a situation where I'm perched on top of my training partner, we know now that there are various ways for us to tighten this hold and start by cinching our training partner in. Okay, this time I'm going to operate a little differently. Most of the time, previously, we've been using our right hand to go after our training partner's right foot and untie our training partner's legs. This time, we're going to use our left hand as the right secures the heel, the left hand goes across and takes this unusual grip. From this grip, I'm going to physically lift my training partner's heel over my knee and form a wedge using my knee as that wedge. I'm in a position now where I can lean forward on my training partner. I can release this heel now, it's done its work. I go over the top, double up the wedge, and from here I go around elbow deep on my training partner. I'm going to take my second hand and post it on my training partner's knee, and as I do that, watch my knees turn in on my training partner, so that as I sit, I end up in the perfect position to transition into a double trouble variation of the cross Ushigurami. When my opponent goes to move away from me, it's so difficult. Both legs are well tied up, and we're in a position now where we can sit him down and start going into our inside heel hook attacks. Let's have a look at that transition again. From a situation where we start off in front of a training partner like so. Typically, we come in here and here to untie our training partner's legs. But this time we're not really untying them, we're actually physically crossing his legs in a way which happens to be advantageous for us. The strategies are a little different. So as I catch my training partner, I come in here and I hold the heel, and I lift the heel over my knee, so that when my training partner goes to extend his legs, it's a difficult thing. You're pulling the legs in an area where the legs have very little strength. Now, from here, I wedge over the top so I can get further around the ankle and get a good ankle, elbow deep grip on my training partner, just like so. I turn my knees inwards, kinking them, just like so. Now my hand pushes outwards on my training partner's knee, and I sit down to the mat and I wedge my knee underneath his leg, just like so. Wherever we go now, we have excellent control of both of our training partner's legs, and it's an easy thing from here to take a seated position and then employ many of the same techniques that we've been looking at in the cross Ushigurami series from this position. For example, in this situation, we could easily tie up our training partner's legs, bring the legs up, and go into one of our favorite attacks, the inside heel hook. As my opponent goes to react and defend himself here, we'll make a transition into inside Senkaku, and as a result, we have tremendous braking pressure. Once again, we start off like so. We want to separate our training partner's legs, but in a way which facilitates the cross Ushigurami position. So I reach across my training partner's shin, secure the ankle, lift it and wedge it with my right knee. Now I wedge it with the opposite arm, keeping everything in close. I go elbow deep around my training partner's ankle. We're in perfect position now to start turning in, blocking and wedging my left knee underneath his left knee. As we lock our training partner up, it's so difficult for him to move away from us. It's a relatively simple thing in these situations now to release, punch through, control our training partner's leg, and from here go into any of the finishes that we saw in the cross Ushigurami system. It's very, very important that you understand that the three manifestations of the leg lock system, cross Ushigurami, straight Ushigurami, and reverse Ushigurami, are all inherently linked. Whenever you have one, you almost always have access to the other two. It is very, very important for your development that you don't just isolate the three systems from each other, but always play the three systems with each other in combinations to break through strong resistance in competition. All of my students excel in the use of all three systems, and that's a big part of the reason for their success. If you only were proficient in one of the systems, you might have success up to a certain level, but very soon your attacks have become predictable and easily countered. If I have two moves working in combination, I don't become twice as effective, I become many times as effective as I would with just one move in isolation. When you can attack from different directions at different times and different opportunities, you become very hard to read, very hard to follow, and as a result your success rate goes up dramatically. We're going to look in the next section at the idea of linking the various systems together, we're going to see that either because of movements I partake in or movements that my opponent partakes in, we can rapidly and easily switch from a cross ashigarami into a straight ashigarami to reverse ashigarami and back and forth between the three. When that starts happening, the leg lock game starts to become truly exciting. We're looking at the idea of linking the various three leg lock systems that we've been looking at. I'm going to start with one of the most important linkages, that between a straight ashigarami and a cross ashigarami. We're going to look at this first because it's one of the most commonly occurring in competition and one which you'll be using a lot in your training and jiu-jitsu outings. It comes from an unlikely source, one that people pay almost no attention to, but which is of extreme importance: the position and movement of my opponent's head. Let's look at a situation where Placido is on two knees in front of me, just like so. Working from bottom position, we go into any kind of standard form of ashigarami. I'll demonstrate it in a situation where Placido simply puts a foot up. From here, we establish a 2-on-1 grip on our training partner, and we go into a very commonly occurring situation. I have a straight ashigarami on my training partner's right leg, and in this case, it's an Arimi ashigarami. Now, my opponent knows there's a certain amount of danger here. There's certain possibilities that I can work with. The first thing that I pay attention to here is the direction of movement of my training partner's head. You might ask, what does that have to do with anything? You're going after his legs, huh? What does the head have to do with things here? Well, my opponent's escape attempts always begin at the head. If he goes to turn and spin, a common form of escape, the head will move away. Now let's understand something. Coming back, when the head moves away, that will always expose my training partner's heel. So as Placido's head moves away, I simply cover the shoelaces and I have the heel exposure I want. This creates a turn effect where it's very, very easy for me now to go into the straight ashigarami system that we looked at. I extract my legs, go to an inside, switch to a far hip ashi, apply pressure, roll across the hips, and we find ourselves now in outside ashigarami, ready for the break. Once again, I'll demonstrate out of a situation where my training partner just has a foot up. We go through 2-on-1 grip and secure our training partner's leg. We bring him back with a knee and fire up an Arimi ashigarami. From here, my opponent's first defensive reaction is to spin out of what he perceives as a conventional outside heel hook attack. Many of your opponents go into a spiral at this point to spin out. We follow the spiral, overtake it, and then ultimately stop the spiral with an outside ashigarami and get the break. As the head moves away, the heel gets exposed. I cover the shoelaces, lock, make my transitions for the various kinds of ashigarami that we saw, and then from this position, we're in the perfect breaking situation. This is how we react when we see the head moving away. Very soon, your opponents are going to figure out that it's not always wise to move the head away and expose their own heel. And so you'll get the opposite effect. They'll start moving the head towards you and putting their heel down on the floor in order to prevent heel exposure. A smart move on their part. So once again, we start as we just did. We draw our training partner in. This time, Placido realizes if he turns away, the heel becomes exposed. So instead, he brings the head towards me and the heel gets planted on the mat. And as a result, there's no heel exposure for me to work with. There's no outside heel hook opportunity until I get the heel. At the same time, he's in a position now where he can start unscrewing the ashigarami and actually causing problems for me now. Okay? So when I see the head move towards me, I go to a very different strategy. I take my right foot and go into the cross buttock position. My right foot goes to the right buttock. My left foot, even if he pushes it down to the mat, means nothing. I'll just go ahead and put my foot on the floor. My left arm will circle around my training partner's ankle, just like so. I'm not interested in a heel hook or an Achilles lock, it's just for control. As I look at my opponent's head position, I will often reach and take a collar tie. If your opponent's taller than you or his head is so far away that you cannot do this, don't worry, you can do it without the collar tie. But when you first start off, I generally recommend catch the collar tie when you can. These two grips enable us to start off balancing our training partner in a forwards direction and get his hands towards the mat. Now we're in a position where we can take our second leg and pommel it inside and go to the reverse X-guard position. From reverse X-guard, my intention is always the same, to get my opponent's hips directly over my head. Once the hips go directly overhead, it becomes very easy to punch the leg through and around and lock a Senkaku. And we can drop our training partner straight down to the mat and into a winning, controlling position from where it's not a difficult thing for us to switch off into a heel hook win. Once again, we have an opponent now who's starting to adapt to the leg lock game. He realizes that moving the head away will expose his heel. So he does the right thing and hides the heel from us. We catch and lock. We know now if the head moves away, the heel will always become exposed. So he does a good job of driving the heel to the floor. Even fighting the Ashigarami, we go cross buttock onto the floor, we catch here and here. If my opponent doesn't give me the head, no problem. I just put my foot right here in the cross buttock position and I use a leg lift to bring his body weight forward. I'll post on the upper body, pommel my legs through and around. As I bring his hips overhead, it becomes very easy now to lock our opponent in this nice tight Senkaku. And from here, we've seen in the past so many ways for us to go into a strong finishing position. We're looking at the idea of linking the three main manifestations of the leg lock system: cross Ashigarami, straight Ashigarami, and reverse Ashigarami. One of the main methods of linking cross and straight Ashigarami is what we call a leg crossover. That's a generic term to describe this action. Anytime I have an opponent in a straight Ashigarami situation and I was able to just cross my opponent's leg over, regardless of how I do it, okay, whether I use a bridging method, crossing over, or what have you, I've crossed the leg across my center line. Okay, I can do it in two directions. Okay, I can pass in either direction to cross the leg over. That's a generic and very useful skill, crossing the leg over the center line. There's different ways we can do this. One of the most commonly seen, one of the most effective in competition, is when my opponent initiates a defensive movement and gives me the opportunity for a crossover. In the previous move, we crossed from straight Ashigarami to a cross Ashigarami, and we initiated the movement. We actively lifted him into the movement. We were the initiators. This time we're more reactive. He's initiating a defensive movement and we cross the leg over in the transition. I'll just reposition our bodies so you get a better angle of this. From a situation where I have a straight Ashigarami, in this case it's just a Rumi Ashigarami, I go in to attack my training partner's heel. A very, very common form of defensive reaction that we have to deal with all the time is an opponent making a quick spin. Not a bad defensive reaction on his part, because it does relieve pressure on the heel hook. Okay, so it's an understandable reaction, it's not wrong. He comes in here and makes the spin. If he makes the spin well, I lose the pressure, he comes over, and now from here he's in a position where he can scoot backwards, fold his legs and cross them, etc., etc. Either moving away to free his knee line or coming forward to cross his ankles. He can make an escape from what could be a dangerous situation. So it's an understandable and intelligent defensive reaction. But we can react with a leg crossover to make a bad situation even worse for him. We're going to go from a straight Ashigarami to a cross Ashigarami, crossing the leg in the middle of his turn. So as we start off in this situation and we go on and we get the heel hook threat, our opponent reacts to the threat. We're going to catch our training partner at the legs. As he makes the turn, I'm going to hold the heel, just like so. As my opponent makes the turn, the second hand comes in and crosses the leg over. Now, it's very, very important. My first motion is always a sit-up and forwards that puts my head over my opponent's knee. What I don't want is to complete the crossover in a supine position. Now I have no chance to expose the heel, and if my opponent turns a second time, I lose the battle and he's gone. So it's extremely important that as we perform the crossover, we come forward to a seated position that positions my head directly over his knee. Let's have a look at this again. We start off in a fairly conventional situation. We've got a heel hook and our opponent starts to react. I come in, I catch, two hands, hold. As my opponent comes over, I turn and I switch the foot from my right armpit to the left armpit, and immediately I come forward into a seated position. This does two good things. First, it enables me to go into the ankle lace ashi for additional control. When he tries to make a second turn, it's now impossible. Alternatively, if I did for whatever reason miss the leg, I'm in a position now where I can generate heel exposure and actually go into a strong finish. Let's have a look at the sequence one more time. We have an opponent who sees or perceives a serious threat, a conventional form of heel hook, the outside heel hook done out of a Rumi Ashigarami. He goes into a good defensive movement. I catch, and as he turns, I physically pass the foot across. Then I time the roll so that I get up to either the secondary leg or a direct attack on the primary leg. This is another commonly seen and highly effective transition from one system to another. We started with a straight Ashigarami, passed the leg in the middle of our opponent's defensive roll, and made a nice transition into a cross Ashigarami situation for an inside heel hook. We went outside heel hook to inside heel hook, utilizing two different Ashigarami systems to complete. We're going through the various links between the three Ashigarami systems that we've worked with. We've seen that we have reverse Ashigarami, cross Ashigarami, straight Ashigarami. My best students excel in all three, and more importantly, they can transition effortlessly between the three. When you can make these transitions at will, whether your opponent's moving or whether you're moving, you're going to become a very, very dangerous opponent, difficult to deal with, difficult to read, difficult for your opponent to understand what you're even trying to accomplish until it's too late. In the previous move, we looked at a crossover, but the crossover was performed in response to my opponent's movement. Now we're going to look at a crossover where he's been held static. There's no movement. It might be because I'm holding him in a particular way. Always remember, a crossover is just a generic term that refers to any situation where I take my opponent's leg from one side across the center line to the other. Different ways we can do this. Let's look at a situation where I have a certain kind of hold, an Achilles hold on my training partner's leg, and a double Achilles, like so. And my legs are in an Rumi Ashigarami. This is an example of double trouble in operation. I'm holding both of my opponent's legs. Now, this is not a good breaking position. It's a good holding position to control people for periods of time. When my opponent goes to kick out, it's incredibly difficult because both legs are controlled. Do I recommend it for breaking? Absolutely not. Do I recommend it for control? Absolutely. It's very good indeed. Okay. However, I want ultimately not to control people, but to break them. So how are we going to make an effective transition here? Well, I'm going to go from an Rumi Ashigarami, and I'm going to separate my training partner's legs and switch across into a Senkaku with my feet on the inside. Okay. It's a straight Ashigarami, but a Senkaku on the inside. Now, I'm going to bring my hand down to his ankle and limp my first arm out so my hand goes over the ankle. In one moment, I'm going to bridge so that his foot rises to my chest. The bridge comes from my inside foot down to the floor. My right knee points at his hip. So if Placido goes to yank his leg out, that Senkaku makes it very, very difficult indeed. Okay. Now I bridge off the left foot and watch how his foot rises. As the foot rises, it's so easy now to cross over. The moment we make a crossover, always the first movement is up and forward so our head is directly over his knee. I facilitate that by taking my feet through to the second leg, and from here we set forward towards the second knee. This gives us great options between controlling the secondary leg or going directly into an attack on the primary leg. You will have to use your experience and judgment to decide which one you want to go. One is more controlling, one is obviously more offensive. So for a situation where I have an initial control on my training partner where he can't really move, he's being held static in this position. When he goes to move around, it's a difficult thing. You've got excellent control over him. Now, in one motion, we're going to pass our legs to the inside. So I limp the first arm out and lock the Senkaku. I limp the second arm out. From here I bring the knees back. I point my knee at his hip. So when he goes to yank his leg out, it's a very difficult thing indeed. If he goes to push on my legs and separate the Senkaku, that too is very difficult. And it's very easy for me to cover the ankle and open a space. I don't want to bridge while I'm covering his shoelaces. Then his foot doesn't move. I want to open the shoelaces, and then from here, a bridge, lifts and elevates the foot, and 2 hands cross the foot over. As a result, we come up and secure the secondary leg, and we're in business now, ready to attack in the usual fashion. We're looking at this idea that all of the main systems, the 3 main manifestations of the leg lock system, are closely linked, and the better you are at linking them together under competition conditions, the more success you're going to have. We're looking at some good examples of linking the systems in combat realistic situations. Earlier in the series, we saw that the fundamental measure of any Ashigarami situation is the relationship between my knee line and my opponent's knee. So for example, if we have a basic or a Rimi Ashigarami, we know that as long as our opponent's knee is contained within our knee line, we're looking pretty good. There's a bunch of things we can do here. Your opponent knows that, and so consistently what you're going to see them looking to do is to move away from you, whether they do it in a seated position or whether they first turn and then from here move away from you. In either case, that's always going to be one of their primary gambits, is to try and increase the distance between their knee and your knee line. Okay, your primary gambit is going to be to maintain that. Now let's be realistic. There's going to be a lot of times you fail and your opponent's knee, for whatever reason, starts shifting away from you. Okay, in these situations, one of my favorite ways to react is spinning around the leg. You can spin either of your opponent's leg. You will often see my students make use of this in competition and training. I'm going to demonstrate a fairly simple example where, let's say for example, I start to perceive Placido is moving away from me, and I can physically feel I'm losing the knee line here, I'm losing the battle. As I feel I lose the battle, from this basic position, I'm going to pop up, and from here I'm going to fold my foot underneath my opponent's legs, and we're going to take a scoop grip on our training partner's leg, just like so. I'm going to perform a movement rather like an elbow escape to bring my knee inside my training partner's legs. Now we're going to perform this motion of spinning the leg. I'm currently facing in towards my opponent, and you can see I'm inside my opponent's legs. This is a position where traditionally we attack with the straight Ashigarami system. I'm going to bring my chest over my training partner's thigh, my hand goes down to the floor, and in one motion I spin and place wedges around my opponent's knee. So now I've spun from inside my opponent's legs to outside his legs. We've gone from a straight Ashigarami scenario to a cross Ashigarami scenario. Because I place the wedges well, I can go either into an attack on the primary leg, or I can bind up the secondary leg and look for more control prior to working my attacks. Let's have a look at it from an opposite angle. So, from a situation where I start off here, like so, my opponent does a good job of moving away. He's gaining distance, and I feel I'm losing the initial Ashigarami. As I feel I lose the initial Ashigarami, I come in and I gain a scoop grip on the opposite leg, working in a dilemma pairing now. As I lose one leg, I gain another. Now I perform a movement rather like an elbow escape, where my knee goes inside his. The further my chest and head is away from his leg, the less successful I'm going to be in this position. So I always come forward and crowd my training partner's chest. My chest to my training partner's thigh. My knee goes around my training partner's hip. As I turn the corner, I reposition the hand so that I can make my knee immediately into a strong wedge. Now when he tries to pull that leg free, there's a set of wedges around it that make it very difficult. I now have a great choice between a direct attack on the primary leg or controlling the secondary leg and slowing the match down. We're looking at the idea of going between the 3 main manifestations of the leg lock system: cross, straight, and reverse Ashigarami. Always remember, whenever you have one, you almost always have access to the other 2. Learning to swim between those 3 systems, those linked subsystems, is going to be a big part of your development. Doing so successfully will make you a much more successful, much more unpredictable leg locking specialist. Let's look now at a situation where we start off with the cross Ashigarami position, and we're going to spin the leg in a different direction to end up in a reverse Ashigarami attack. I'll have Placido sitting here, and I'll have cross Ashigarami like so with my training partner. Now, there's always going to be times you try to work from this position, your opponent comes forward and vociferously hand fights. You're interested in getting to the heel hook and they're interested in stopping your hands from locking around the legs. Whenever I feel I'm in a strong hand fight situation from here, spinning the leg is often a great option. I'm going to take my leg through like so, and I'm going to scoop my training partner's other leg, and I'm going to shoot my arm across my training partner's body. I'm in a position now to draw my left foot back, and as a result, I can hop across my training partner's body and come up into the reverse Ashigarami position. Now, one of the beauties of reverse Ashigarami is that I'm faced away from my opponent, and as a result, it's very difficult for him to hand fight me now. When I face my opponent, hand fighting is always an issue because my hands are right in front of my opponent's hands. But in reverse Ashigarami, my back is between his hands and my hands. Much harder for him to go to hand fight now. Okay, so very often for me, if I'm in a stalled situation, I can't get to the heel and he's hand fighting well in this situation here, I will often put his back down towards the floor and then punch through underneath my training partner's arm and sweep my foot back. Now, from any kind of scoop grip, I drop up on top of my training partner, and when we goes into lock up his legs now, my hands have my back and basically torso between his hands and my hands. When he goes to grab my hands from here, it's tough. My hands are a long way from his. And we know now what we like to do in this situation. We tie up our training partner's legs. We're in a position now where we can start to unlock our training partner's legs and go on the attack. From here, we get the double leg roll, and we're in a perfect position now to attack from the various means that we saw in the reverse Ashigarami series. So we'll start off with a cross Ashigarami situation like so. We run into a strong hand fighter. No problem. From here, as we bring his torso down to the floor, we punch a hand through. You can scoop grip like so, and then from here, I start pushing my body up on top of his, and we make the transition. He's presumably going to lock his legs defensively at this point, otherwise I'd just attack right there. And now we're in a position to go on the attack. As we unlock our training partner's legs, we go into a classic roll, which puts us in a position to attack with the knee bar. So this would be a fine example of spinning the leg in a very different fashion. Once again, the theme is the same. We get shut down in one of the systems, and instead of just fighting and fighting from one system, we make a simple transition to another system, which facilitates getting around the problem we found in the previous system. As a result, we get through and get the submission hold we're looking for. We're looking at the idea of transitioning from the three linked subsystems of the leg lock system, going from one to the other. We've seen we can do this as a direct action on our part. We can do it in response to our opponent's action. We can spin around the leg, we can cross a leg over, numerous ways that we've looked at. But the one which we're going to look at now is a little different. And it's very important you master this kind of action. We're going to get ourselves in a pressure situation where we've lost a leg lock. In other words, you're in trouble. Okay, things didn't go the way they wanted to. And still, we can use a transitional movement, in this case a rolling movement, to go into another form of the system, recover, and get a win. This is very, very important. I would be a liar if I said to you every time you attempt the moves in this video, they're going to work first time every time. No matter how proficient you become in leg locks, there's going to be times you lose the heel, you end up with an opponent halfway to your back. Learning to recover from partial failure is a big part of mastery in jiu-jitsu, and in the case of leg locks, no exception. You must be able to recover from an initial partial failure and go on to success. This is a huge part of your development. Okay, remember, World Championship competition, you're not going to hit home runs every time you step out on the plate. There's going to be a lot of times you attempt moves, and as you attempt moves, you take risks. And as your opponents get better and better, they're going to be able to exploit errors on your part, and risks will become very risky situations. And you're going to have to learn to recover and go on and get the win. This is a good example of this kind of thing in operation. We're going to start from one of our favorite finishing positions, the outside Ashigarami. If we have the outside Ashigarami and we have the heel, there is no danger of back explosion. Even though my back is partially turned to my opponent, as long as I own the heel, no danger of back explosion. In fact, it would actually work against my opponent's interest to try to come to my back because I have the heel. Look how once I get my grip, if Placido comes forward, he actually increases the braking pressure. Okay? Everything changes, however, if my opponent manages to slip the heel. Now, if I try to dig for the heel, outside Ashigarami is a very risky position if I've lost the heel. That's why when we looked at the system of that led to outside Ashigarami, we never started with the outside Ashigarami, because there's actually considerable back exposure here. If I start fighting for a heel in this position, it's very easy for my opponent to roll up on my back, free his leg, and that now I find myself in a situation where I'm under extreme duress and I'm fighting for survival. Okay. Now, once we get a hold of our training partner's heel and we feel we've lost it, it's very important how we manage this situation. Okay. What I don't want is, as I lose the heel, to keep fighting for the original lock in an outside Ashigarami. Okay. Instead, I'm going to physically hold my opponent's heel with my hand. We are not holding with an Achilles lock. Just hold with your hand. Okay. As Placido comes forward and brings his head over my head, this is potentially very dangerous for me. There's a lot of back exposure here. Okay. If I lose the foot, that's very, very bad indeed. So I keep a hold of the ankle, I take my free hand and I put it underneath my training partner's armpit. I take my bottom leg and push off it so that I can bring my body up to my knees. And then critically, I position my head inside his knee. As a result, we can switch our training partner over, recover from what could have been a very poor situation, and end up now in a cross Ashigarami situation, ready for a win. I can either tie up the secondary leg, or I can go directly into an attack on the primary leg. Your choice. Once again, so a situation where I start off in an outside Ashigarami, and I feel I've lost the heel. I hold just like so. As my opponent comes forward, his head is over my head. That's bad for me. I bring my foot up, my hand goes under the armpit, my head goes inside my training partner's leg, so that as we come out the back door, we end up in a perfect position to lock up, cross Ashigarami. We've made a transition from a version of straight Ashi into a cross Ashi, and we're in a position to win. Let's look at it at a more natural speed so we get a sense of how the roll makes us transition from one form of Ashi to another. So, we're here working. Unfortunately, I lose the heel. I hold with a 5-finger grip. As my training partner comes up, we end up in the perfect position to roll through and come out the back door into a new form of Ashigarami.